Hello, everyone. I'm Leah Toms from the marketing team, and we're back with a new webinar, Back to School for Superadmins. Learn how automation is the answer to short certificate lifespans. I have Nick France, our Chief Technology Officer, here for you today. As always, this presentation is being recorded, and we'll share it with you afterwards, most likely tomorrow. Finally, if you've got any questions during the presentation, send them our way. Please use the Q&A function, and we'll answer as many as we can at the end. Nick, let's get started.
Thanks very much, Leah. And good morning, everybody. So I'm just going to quickly run through the agenda of what we're going to talk about today, and then we'll dive right in. And as I said, or as Leah said, we will have time for some questions at the end of the webinar. So what we're really here to talk about today is kind of the focus of short lifetime certificates or 47-day certificates. So I'm going to run through a little bit about why that came about, what the timelines look like for that. And then we'll talk about the costs and the risks of doing certificates manually in a time when certificates are all short and down to 47 days. We'll cover a little bit of what we've kind of proposed as planning and timelines for the changes and what you should be thinking about now and over the next few months. And then finally, I want to talk a little bit about how you choose a reputable CA. I'll touch a little bit on some of the things that we as Sectigo focus on, especially in light of things that have happened in our industry over the past 12 to 18 months, and how you can use that information to choose the right CA to partner with you and help with your security. Just before I get into the full agenda, I just wanted to have a slide here to explain what we've seen with our experience with the education market specifically. We have a fairly long history of working with the educational market, so the various large groups in Europe, in America, in like South Africa, for example, and Australia, Oceania. So we kind of have a good idea of what a typical education kind of customer looks like today. Obviously, a lot of the focus and what we're really going to talk about today is TLS certificates, or SSL as they're unfortunately still known. This is the only certificate type, by the way, that is having this lifetime reduction, so that's what we're going to focus on. Obviously used for servers, websites, login systems, learning systems, management systems, and all those kind of things. We do also know that a lot of educational users also use email certificates for SMIME, as it's called, so for signing and encrypting emails. It's not quite as prevalent as we would like it to be in many businesses, apart from certain regulated industries, but certainly in education, we have seen that rollouts of SMIME, particularly to the entire student body, is something that's very popular, and we obviously support that as well. And finally, we do know that a lot of education users look at private certificates as well, and private PKI for client certificates for authentication and for internal systems and things like that. So this is just what we see as a kind of typical, really, educational user who we're hopefully talking to today. So to start the presentation, 47 days. Hopefully, as most of you know, there is now an official timeline for the reduction of lifetime of SSL or TLS certificates over the next few years. And I want to talk about how we've got there, why we ended up with 47 days, and talk a little bit about the various timelines and how that's going to impact you. So just to recap, certificates have been available for long lifetimes for quite some time now. I've been with the company and in this industry for over 2 decades. And back when I started, we were able to issue certificates for 10 or 15 years. People didn't have very many of them, and it would be something they would kind of fire and forget and not think about for many years and then go back and renew a few years later. That timeline has been reduced, as you've just seen with the nice little animation there that played. But we have seen the lifetimes reduced down to really to 5, 4, 3, 2, and to where we are today at 1 year. Now, it's slightly over 1 year. It's 398 days technically, but we just call it 1 year. Now, at the end of February into March in 2023, there was a CA Browser Forum meeting. That is a group that get together. It's a voluntary industry body. It's CAs like ourselves, and then the browsers like Apple, Google, Microsoft, and Mozilla. And we have our meetings 2 or 3 times a year. There was one at the end of February in Ottawa in Canada. And around that time, Google published a document they call Moving Forward Together. Now, that was really their policy outline, their manifesto, if you like, of how they wanted the web PKI, as we refer to it, which is public TLS certificates, how they wanted that to look over the next few years for them and for all the billions of users they represent. There were a lot of things in that document, a lot of changes, a lot of proposals, but the main one that most people picked up on, which has the most impact, is this reduction in certificate validity to 90 days. And that was Google's proposal in early 2023. That obviously caused some discussion. Certainly at Sectigo, we leaned heavily into that. We support it fully, and we talked about that to all of our customers. We did webinars. We've helped to get a lot of our subscribers to that position where they can use short lifetime certs already. Then in January of this year, Apple finally came out with a ballot in the CAB forum. So this is a vote in order to pass a change to codify this change. And what Apple actually proposed was a step-down transition, eventually arriving at 47 days. I will note that we as Sectigo sponsored the ballot. We endorsed the ballot. It's actually my name on there alongside the representative from Apple, and we are fully in support of this and the timeline that we'll talk about in a minute. It had an extended discussion period, and eventually the ballot passed in April. It gets finally ratified about a month later after some intellectual property checks. But it was almost a unanimous ballot as well. There were no no's. There were a few abstentions, but there were no votes. So this was something that the industry as a whole supported and passed. Why is it better? A lot of people ask that. Why is it better to have 47-day certs versus 10-year certificates or even 1-year certificates? There's a number of reasons. We have a few listed on this slide here. I'll jump around a little bit, but I think the best thing and the initial thing to say is shorter is better. If you have a 10-year certificate and something about that certificate is bad, whether the key is compromised, whether the information was incorrect, incorrectly validated, whether it's been stolen by a malicious party, having that certificate able to be abused for a 10-year period is way worse than having that abusable for a month, for 47 days, for 5 or 6 days. So the amount of time you can limit the abuse potential of that certificate is better. Because what we're talking about here, the people we're protecting, and the reason Google and Apple are so supportive of this proposal, is because they are representing the billions of users who use their products to go on the internet and expect their information to be secure. So everybody that uses an Apple iPhone, an iPad, a MacBook, a Mac laptop, a Mac desktop, they are all being secured by Apple and Apple's policies. The same for Google. Every Chrome browser, every Chrome OS machine, every Android machine, that is the people who Apple and Google and Microsoft and Mozilla are representing and want to keep secure. So the less time something bad is out there, the better for all of those people. That's the primary reason. Shorter is better. There's a number of other reasons. Again, jumping around here, things like operational efficiency. Obviously, this is going to drive people to automate certificates, which is what I'll focus on and talk about in a few minutes. And automating things is better. Once you get the automation in place and you have good monitoring, it just means you're more efficient. You don't have manual processes, people being involved. You get that back, that efficiency. You have these things automated. You don't have to worry about certificate expiry because your systems just handle it automatically. It does give you agility and flexibility. Tied in a little bit with the second bullet here about cryptographic standards. Over the past few years, we've seen changes with those standards. Computers get faster, researchers get better, scientific breakthroughs come around. I mean, not in this deck particularly, but you'll hear us talk about quantum computing and what happens when a computer comes along that can break all of the codes we rely upon. There have been changes over the past few years where we've needed to deprecate old standards, old algorithms, and old key sizes. And if someone has a certificate that uses a weak algorithm that is out there for 10 years, it could take them that 10 years to cycle that out. There's no incentive for them to drop that certificate and get a new one. Whereas if everybody's on fully automated short lifetime certificates, introducing new standards, changing SHA-1 to SHA-2, changing minimum key sizes is much easier and can be done in a much shorter time, which again ultimately keeps us all safe. And of course, all of this is about adopting best practices. It is good to be agile. You need the ability to move from one CA to another. The CA needs to be able to change root certificates and issuing CAs much more frequently. And automation and the adoption of automation is the best way to get there and the best way to make sure that you are all in a position to be flexible, be agile, and not have any problems as a result of certificates expiring or of standards changing. So this is a chart that shows the actual timelines. I'll talk about this and talk through the dates. We're today, as we said, we can issue a certificate for 398 days. So any public CA can provide you a 398-day certificate today. Starting in March 15th of 2026, which is not that many months away, it's barely 6 or 7 months now, we are going to go down to 200 days. So the lifetime of those certificates is essentially going to be halved. These durations, these 200, 147, my good colleague Tim, our Chief Compliance Officer and frequent partner on these webinars, he explains it as like 200 days is like 6 months plus a little bit of wiggle room. It gives people the time to not have to do things rigorously at 6 months. They have 6 months plus a month and a little bit of wiggle room. But we're going down to 200 days in a few months. Then a year later, March 15th, 2027, we drop down again to 100 days. So we half it. And then finally, by March 15th, 2029, you'll note the gap of 2 years there. We missed 2028, and that was one of the kind of compromises for all the CAs to agree on this, was that we had a little bit of a longer transition period. But then by 2029, we're down to 47 days. Now, I would say by the time you get to 100 days, which is basically 90, and you're fully automated, the step down to 47 days should be relatively painless. We could probably go beyond 47 to 30 to 14 to 7 or less, because people at that point should be and will have to be automated in order to get there. So that's the timeline of certificate term and how that reduces. I'll just quickly talk about the final column, OV reuse period. What does that mean? So that is the amount of time we can reuse a business verification. Okay, so with OV and EV certificates, if some of you are using those, we can currently do the business verification, which is inherently a manual process. We can do that once every 825 days. Now, we at Sectigo do that annually anyway. So you'll see that drop down to 366 days or annually starting in March next year. That means we just have to revalidate your business details once a year. We already do that all the time for all of our customers, so that doesn't change. And you will see it remains at 1 year all the way to 2029. And that's really just us saying that, look, that business information doesn't change very frequently. Where it's included in a certificate, we could just get away with verifying it once a year because of the infrequency of change. The middle column, DCV reuse period, that's how long we can reuse a domain verification. Now, these are TLS certificates. They're issued to fully qualified domain names. They are an attestation that somebody controls a fully qualified domain name, a DNS record, for a period of time. And this reuse period is going down as well. 398 days today. So for some of our customers, we do that. For many, we don't, and we require it every time a certificate is issued. But next year, we go down to 200 days alongside the certificate term. We then go down to 100 days, also alongside the certificate term. And by the time we get to March 2029, that DCV reuse period is reduced to 10 days. Now, what does that actually mean for you? Quite honestly, that means you need to be friendly with your DNS and your domain management teams. It means that you are going to have to automate the verification of your domain names, which means having some automation with DNS. There are a lot of solutions out there. There's a lot of possible things and ways that can work. It is eminently possible today, but you do need to get to the stage where you are automating your domain verification. So as it stands today, you could have an email-based verification. Someone clicks a link and that is valid for a year. That is going away. You will have to automate this through DNS. It's highly likely that email-based validation will be gone in the next couple of years. So your choices will be to do this via HTTP, which is fine, but has some drawbacks, or doing the verification through DNS, which is the best way. It is automatable and it can be done much more frequently than every 10 days, so you don't have any problems in the future. So that's what the step down and the timeline looks like as we get towards 2029. And of course, everybody now has more certificates. We are going to have more frequent renewals, and that does increase the risk of outages if you are not prepared and you are not automated. Now, this slide is a great one that our marketing team love to put in here, and they've done a fantastic job putting together. But it just really kind of illustrates that even over the past few years, if you look at some of the names on this slide, and we're not trying to pick on anybody or point anybody out in particular, but it goes to illustrate that even people like Microsoft, who have entire teams of PKI specialists, still miss certificate expiries. They still make mistakes with certificates, and they still cause outages. Okay, so expired certificates, incorrectly installed certificates, forgotten to renew certificates do cause significant outages with your systems, with your business, and with your infrastructure. And you can see from this, there's quite a number. I'm sure there's more we've missed on here, and they do keep coming. And sometimes they just make the tech press. Very occasionally, they make national news. Certainly, things like the mobile phone outage that we saw a few years ago, here in the UK at least, they happen unfortunately quite frequently. And it's kind of an illustration that we need organizations, including yourselves, to be prepared to have automation and to avoid these kind of outages. Obviously, it does have, the short lifetime certificates does have challenges, operational compliance and continuity challenges. It does increase the risk of error if you do things manually. If you're forcing somebody to go through this manual process once a month, it does increase the risk of not installing the certificate correctly or making mistakes, which does lead to downtime. You can miss expiries and renewals if you're relying on Excel spreadsheets and calendar reminders to make sure people are really installing certificates. And of course, it's expensive from a manual perspective. Having people go through this process by hand costs their time, and it costs you money in having people do that. There are definitely compliance challenges here. I mean, certainly for things like PCI compliance, you have to have certificates. TLS is for people's data being secured in transit. And if that is private data, if that's PII or data that has to be kept secure, you do run the risk of things like GDPR violations if there's problems. Probably have your own internal audit failures and other external governance policies that you are required to have TLS working. And if you don't do it properly, they do cause compliance problems for you. And of course, it all boils down to continuity challenges. Whether it's an expired certificate or an incorrectly installed certificate, you are going to have some kind of outage with your business or with your, your student login systems or your student registration systems or some kind of systems that will cause pain for your organizations and your institutions. Now, it is, as I said, it is something that can absolutely be automated. It has to be automated. We want it to be automated. Google, Apple, Microsoft, and Mozilla want it to be automated. Many years ago, certificate automation has been very possible for many, many years now. It hasn't always been easy. And I think one of the reasons for that is there have not been any well-defined open standards in order to automate certificates. Now, we at Sectigo support a lot of different standards for automating certificates. We have our REST APIs in our systems, so you can build your own scripts and tie into your own pipelines, your own systems, and do work yourself. We also support a couple of standards like EST and SCEP, which are slightly older standards, but again, open standards for automating the request and signing of certificates. The big one on the left, though, with the nice fancy green logo, is of course ACME, which is a fairly recent standard. It's only 5 or 6 years old, maybe a little bit longer than that, but it is a open standard. It's RFC 8555. It is a well-documented standard. It is a battle-tested standard, and it is a standard very specifically designed to help automate TLS certificates. It includes key generation, request generation. It includes that domain verification we talked about. So part of an ACME client and an ACME system is to handle the validation of the domain names that are going into that certificate, and you can hook into your web server or your DNS provider and have the whole thing automated. We adopted this very early on. Most of our large customers use ACME. We appreciate it isn't going to do 100%. It isn't in every single place it should be, but it is the best standard for automating certificates. And we are thankfully seeing more and more vendors include Acme clients first class within their solutions. So their appliances, their software, F5 has Acme built in. A lot of web servers, things like Caddy, have Acme built in for automating certificates. Apache has a module for it. Nginx, a very popular web server, just announced they support Acme a few days ago in their the main version, the main release of their web server software. So it is something that we are seeing a lot of traction in, built into existing systems to allow you to simply plug in a server, some simple credentials, and it will just automate certificates away, and you shouldn't need to worry about it again. But certainly, automation is the main thing you need to look at. We have this slide in here where we say making the case for automation. A lot of enterprises and business like to be able to have these numbers so that they convince more senior people within the organization that having to automate and having to spend the effort, and in some cases the budget, to automate their certificates needs to be done now. It needs to be done now, certainly before March of 2026, so that you are ready and automated for this kind of changes that are happening. And this just gives you an idea. Manual certificate management or certificate lifecycle management, it does take time per certificate. I've installed more certificates than I can remember in my life. I can do it with my eyes closed, and it will still take me longer than it should to do that certificate right. What button do I need to click in IAS, or what's the exact incantation in OpenSSL to produce a CSR and the right kind of key? If that's automated, sub 5 minutes is probably quite a high estimate as well. I mean, we have customers who are using Acme to automate hundreds of thousands of certificates a day, every single one of them fully validated through DNS, and their average certificate request to installation time is probably less than 10 seconds. So it's absolutely possible to get this and save an awful lot of time. It does reduce the risk of outages. If you take humans out of the loop in this, like we do in every system, when you're building VMs, you're building desktops, you're building systems, have it automated, the risk of errors and the risk of outages is incredibly low. You do have to monitor it, of course. You have to monitor that these processes and these automations run correctly and they do things correctly. But then you're only responding to alerts and monitoring, and you aren't going to get somebody, fat fingering a script or pressing the wrong button and causing a big outage. Does mean that your staff are obviously freed up in time to do other more important things and not have to worry about certificate management and the very unsexy job of installing and updating certificates. Compliance is a big thing. It's not spreadsheet driven anymore. You have a certificate management solution that can handle all of the audits. It can handle all of the logs. You can print off a report to give to your compliance people or to your finance people to say, yes, we're all covered. We have all our certificates. We're all ready to go. And of course, this idea of security posture, it means you are proactive. It means you are ready. I would love it if all of our customers were fully automated and I could ask any single one of them or all of them to replace every single certificate they have with the click of a button in less than 24 hours. We have some that can. There's a lot of enterprises out there, subscribers of ours, and certainly other ones we're aware of, who can reissue and reinstall their entire certificate portfolio in a matter of minutes or hours. We would like everybody to get there. So if we are forced, or the world is forced to make changes, such as quantum computing, breaking all of the codes and the algorithms we use, we would like everybody to be able to press a button and ride those changes out without concern, without outages, and without real problems. So what we do have here is a little bit of a plan, a timeline to try and illustrate where you should be and what you should be looking at over the next few months. Obviously, we've had this in slides for some time now, so the timeline is getting tighter and tighter as we approach March. But what we'd like to say first is you've got to get your inventory together around now. You need to use fall or autumn, as it really is, to kind of evaluate what you're looking for in a management tool, what automation needs you have. And by the end of the year, you really should have a vendor chosen, ready, and a plan ready to go if you don't have already. Then in the early part of the new year, you can do a little bit of testing, a little bit of training, and you can be ready for the first step down in March of 2026. So the first point is knowing your inventory or inventory. You need to know what you have. If you don't know what you have, you can't manage it. It can cause problems. We see problems with certificates with shadow IT. Some admin has gone and installed an Acme client and they're using a free CA to get certificates, which in of itself is not a problem. But if they go or they forget about it and those certificates are critical and you don't know about them, you have a huge problem. So the first thing is visibility. Our certificate management tools and most others, of course, have discovery built in. They have tools where you can scan, you can compile lists, you can look at certificate transparency logs, and you can get together the information of your inventory so you know what you're looking at, you know when your certificates expire, and you can do something about it and start to automate. So you have to have that inventory ready around now. Now is the time to gather that. Then you need to start looking at what your automation needs are. Okay, you need to start looking at, can I use Acme here? Can I use a network agent? Can I use a piece of native software? Do I need to write a script talking to the APIs? Where do I need to put this automation and how do I need to fit it into our system? I'm going to put this next slide up because it's something that, again, my colleague Tim and I do like to tell people. Don't let perfect be the enemy of good. I would love everybody to have 100% automation, but I and Sectigo, we acknowledge that there are systems out there that simply can't be automated very easily. There's banks and big telcos that have old mainframes that we all rely on to keep those businesses running so we can have power and phone and bank accounts. They may not be automatable. You can't just install an Acme client on them and have it go off and get certificates very easily. But what you need to do is prioritize systems for automation. There is not a lot of time left for these changes, so you need to look at systems, things you can do easily and quickly. High criticality systems, things that you can install an Acme client on, things that you could be automated first, focus on those. Lower criticality systems don't have a lot of options for automation. Perhaps look at those a bit later, but don't aim for 100% when if you can get 95% of your estate automated fairly easily, you then have the resources freed up to look at that 5% and figure out what you're going to do with them. And I will also add very briefly here, there may be reasons that those systems that can't be automated don't actually need public certificates. You may actually find you need a private CA or something where 47 days isn't an issue and you can have 10-day certificates and 10-year certificates, sorry, and you don't need automation because maybe that system doesn't need a certificate that is going to be trusted by every copy of Chrome, Safari, and Microsoft Edge on the planet. So it's this evaluation and prioritization of your systems for automation. Think about that. Aim for 100%, but don't let it get in the way of getting a good 95, 98% in time for some of these deadlines. By the time we get to winter, towards the end of the year, hopefully you should have chosen a vendor, a CA, a CLM vendor. You should be ready. You should know what you're going to do. And hopefully you get that all signed off and get that all ready to go so that when the new year comes round, you can start testing, training, and transitioning. Now, I appreciate timelines for educational institutions can be a little bit different for enterprises. You may not have the same over Christmas free windows. You don't need to worry about, Christmas sales and Black Friday. You need to look more at term times, when students return, student intake, and things like that. So look around those times and use them in the new year to get some testing, get training ready, and start to transition because the date of March 2026 is very, very fast approaching and you need to be ready for that. So you do need to stay ahead. You do need to have your monitoring, do periodic checks, and don't let certificate management fall off your radar again because you may end up being on the marketing slide that that we put together of all the outages and issues with certificate expiry and certificate caused outages. Finally, I just want to talk a little bit about how you would choose a reputable CA or how you would want a CA partner or a CLM vendor to work with that is trustworthy ultimately. And one of the reasons I want to touch on this for a few minutes is because we've seen the change of pace in our industry over the past few years has rapidly increased. We've got short lifetime certs, we've got a bunch of other changes coming up that we talk about. But one of the other things we've seen, especially in the past 12 to 18 months, is changes in CAs where CAs have potentially even been distrusted. Okay, so we've seen a number of smaller CAs last year. We've seen some smaller CAs distrusted in the past few weeks by Google and other trust programs. And of course, the big one we saw last year, the Entrust, a very large commercial CA with an awful lot of customers, were distrusted. Now, we at Sectigo, we took on their customers and their business, and we are transitioning, and we've almost completed the transition of those customers onto our systems, onto our CA, and we've helped them. But one of the things that we have to accept is that, CAs can be distrusted. No CA is safe. No CA is safe. Things can happen to those CAs, they can be distrusted, and you as a subscriber need to be able to adapt to those changes. So one of the things we do get asked is, why won't this happen to Sectigo, and what does Sectigo do about it to make you a trustworthy partner? As I've said, nobody can guarantee a CA won't be distrusted. Mistakes happen, human errors happen, problems happen. But what we at Sectigo like to do, and what we've done with a real concerted effort over the past few years, is kind of reinforce what we feel is our position as a leader in the industry. And we have this kind of tie standard, this Venn diagram to try and illustrate that. So we have our technical leadership. Okay. We do technical leadership within our industry. Okay. We contribute to the industry. We we give back. So we produce a number of systems. We have something called CRT to SH you may have used, which is an indexer for certificate transparency. That's like an official standard for all of our industry for incident reporting and what they use to log and review and research. And we provide that service to the world for free. We've built software like PKI Metal, which is what's called a certificate linter. It's used to check that certificates are good before you issue them. And again, we open source that. Other CAs use it and we give it to the industry for free. We also have a number of other ones that I won't list here, but we also have something called OpenMPIC, which we produced, which is for a new standard that's coming into effect in about 3 or 4 weeks. And we produce the open source standard reference for that for other CAs to use. So we do lead technically. We try and give back. We try and be the leaders of the industry. Ethical leadership is something that is more difficult to do, I would say, but it's certainly something we do as well, which is making sure we are good ethically in terms of the industry. And what do I mean by that? All CAs have incidents. We at Sectigo have incidents as well. Certificates get misissued, certificates have to be revoked. But our stance is we do those things properly. If we have to revoke certificates, we're open about the reasons, we detail that, we take questions, we're public about everything that was gone wrong and mistakes that were made, and we take the required action to revoke and to reissue those certificates. We always will. One of the reasons Entrust were distrusted is because they refused to revoke those certificates until they were forced to. They refused to take action, and as a consequence, they were ultimately distrusted. We do not do that. We will do things properly. And finally, the intellectual leadership, that's really just to say, we do a lot of focus on leading within the industry intellectually. So we are I think we have the most number of positions in the CAB Forum in terms of chairs and vice chairs. We work together with other industry groups to move forward standards. So as I said, MPIC, we help define that. We produce the reference standard. CAA, Certificate Authority Authorization. We helped, one of our team helped to develop that standard and that RFC. We work with a lot of special interest groups. Myself and other colleagues speak at various events, and we try and give thought leadership and intellectual leadership so that people are prepared for the changes. One other thing I'll mention on intellectual leadership at the end, because he's not here, but two of my good colleagues, Tim and Jason, produce something called the Root Causes podcast. It's certainly the most popular and probably perhaps the only podcast dedicated to PKI and digital certificates. It has an incredibly large listenership, hundreds of thousands of people. Very regularly, we get customers telling us that they listen to that podcast to learn, to find out what's going on, and to hear about standards and changes in our industry. So it's that kind of leadership that we want to give to the industry, and why that we feel that makes us a trustworthy partner and someone you can hopefully rely on into the future. This is just a very quick slide to illustrate all the kind of standards that we have, all the kind of audits and credentials that we have, and the things that we do. And basically just an illustration and a summarization of everything I've just talked about, because choosing a trustworthy CA is critical. You want someone that will not only work with you, provide the solutions that you need, but also someone who you feel will be around, who is reliable, who will do things properly in order to maintain their position in the industry and therefore your security. So these are the things that a trustworthy CA will do. We have systems and solutions to help prevent these outages, to help you deal with this 47-day changes and a number of other changes. We have other webinars I'm sure you can find on our website, because there's a number of other changes happening in our industry, things like client authentication that you may need to be aware of. We want to help you get through those changes and adapt to those changes by having reliable systems, reliable services, and services and solutions that you can practically use. And that will reduce your security risk. It will simplify your compliance that we've talked about. It'll reduce your costs and it will help future-proof your business. So we want to prove to you that we are the right trustworthy CA and CLM vendor to get you through these changes and to give you a safe and secure future with respect to PKI, certificates, and TLS. And this is where we, see ourselves fitting in to your estate. Just a few bullet points about our solutions that we do. Obviously, we're a trusted and highly regulated CA. We do have detailed and transparent pricing. You can obviously reach out to our sales team, or we will reach out to you afterwards if you have any questions, and we can detail how our pricing works, especially going into this era of short lifetime certificates. Buying a fat 10-year certificate for a price is not the way it was anymore. You can't do that when it's 47 days. We have a great kind of subscription pricing model that we can detail, and we can give you not just TLS, but also S-MIME we talked about. We can do private CAs as well. We can deploy those private CAs fast. You have them in a single pane of glass, in a single interface. We're 100% cloud native solution, so it's all a managed hosted service that we have. We have a full CLM. We haven't talked a whole lot about CLM, though I've dotted that acronym into the presentation here a few times, but that's certificate management. That's a comprehensive solution that can find your certificates, help you manage them, help you keep track of them, help you notify expiries, and help you automate them. So we provide a full and best of breed solution that can do all of that for you completely as a managed service. There are some on-premise components as well that you can install to work with various systems like Active Directory, or to integrate into device management and things like that. But we have that complete solution, and we're more than happy to talk about that. If you reach out to us, we'll get some of our sales or account teams in touch with you to detail this and give us some information on what you have and what you need, and we'll get you a solution together. So I think that's pretty much everything to talk about today. Leah, I don't know if we have a few questions we want to take and try and give some answers to anybody that might have questions that we need answering.
Yes, thank you, Nick. We have got one to get us started. What automation tools do you recommend?
It's a good question. I talked quite a bit in the presentation about Acme. I would say generally Acme is the place to focus. Acme is obviously an automation protocol, but it has a lot of different clients where you actually support that automation tools. So if you go on something like GitHub, for example, there are thousands and thousands of Acme capable clients, whether they are standalone clients, whether it's a software library you can use in your existing code, whether it's something you can script against, or as I've said, whether it's a native solution built into a software as a service or appliance or piece of hardware that you buy. Acme is probably the primary focus. The main reason for that is 47-day certificates are TLS. S-MIME is still going to be 1 or 2 years. Code signings is still going to be 1 or 2 years. Those aren't going to be reduced down to 47 days. It's TLS that is, and Acme is very specifically designed for TLS certificates. So I would definitely suggest Acme and all the clients and solutions around it are the best thing to look at first for certificate automation.
Thank you. And we had one more come in. Will there be an extension to the deadline if we aren't ready?
It's a good question, and the simple answer is no. These deadlines are fixed, they are immovable. Any CA that chooses to ignore those deadlines for a customer, that CA will effectively be distrusted. They will likely go through what Entrust and those other smaller CAs went through, which means that all of their certificates and all of their customers will essentially be invalidated. So no, these are absolutely hard deadlines. You have some time, as I say, the first step down to 200 days is in a few months' time, but you could arguably get away with some manual work at 200 days. It's when it starts to hit 147 that you'll have real problems. So if you feel you can't make the deadlines, you can probably do things manually for an interim, but certainly reach out to us and we will help you figure out the reasons why you can't automate and give you some solutions for it. But no, these are hard deadlines and they won't be moved for anybody.
Great. And there are no more questions right now. So I think in the interest of time, give everyone a bit of time back. We'll wrap up here. Thank you everyone for your time, and thanks, Nick. If you do have any more questions, do get in touch with us on our website. There's a contact form. And we also have more webinars coming up, and you can find them on our website. We'd love to see you there. But for now, thank you and have a good rest of your day.
Thanks very much, everybody. Thanks, Leah.
Thank you.